Well, let's talk about some of the issues raised with my guests. Rishi Sunak, the Conservative MP for Richmond, and the Labour MP for York Central, Rachael Maskell. Rishi Sunak, this report was never going to go far enough as far as some were concerned. Was it doomed from the start?
Well, I don't think that's particularly fair. I mean, remember, this was Conservative Prime Minister Theresa May who initiated this report, so you should give her credit for that. And she specifically put in charge of it someone who worked for Tony Blair. He was a Labour appointee. He's not a Conservative. He's a sensible, independent voice from the middle who has expertise in this area. And he's worked very hard on this. I actually think, if you read the report, it is very detailed, very thorough, and contains lots of interesting observations and recommendations which the government is now going to take away and have a look at.
Rachael Maskell, it does contain recommendations to improve workers' rights. You must welcome that.
Well, we have to first of all look at why we're in the position we are. 4.5 million people working insecurely across our economy, something that has come in really since 2010 in the Conservative government, and now workers not knowing the number of hours that they have to work, the amount of pay they're going to have, and how they can live out their lives and raise their family on such insecurity. And the report makes recommendations like the right to request the number of hours you work. What is a right to request, we must ask, because surely we've all got the right to ask, and therefore there isn't the underpinning of workers' rights in this report with your statutory obligations. And of course, if you want to challenge that, you'll have to pay over £1,000 to take a case to an employment tribunal.
There will be people, though, in your constituency, presumably students, for example, who enjoy the flexibility of zero-hours contracts.
Well, enjoy flexibility at work, and flexibility at work is really important, but you can do that as an employee. It's about the worker working alongside the employee to ensure that there is flexibility, and you can build that into substantive employment in a number of ways. So a zero-hour contract should be consigned to history, and therefore, you know, I have got real concern. First of all, there's no legislation behind the Taylor report, but real concern about the insecurity people are now facing in their lives.
And Rishi Sunak, isn't this the problem, that there's now a whole generation of people coming into work but not able to plan for their futures?
No, I don't think. We just had employment figures released this week which actually show record levels of employment. I mean, 50-year highs in the employment level, 40-year lows in the unemployment level, you know, record lows in youth unemployment, fastest growing employment in the northeast. So there's lots to be positive about, and Matthew Taylor recognised that in his report and said that what we've created here is an incredibly successful economy. But to go back on the points on the 0 hours, and we do have a different point of view on this, you know, 70% of people on 0 hours contracts actually want to retain them. They are happy. Those are independent figures, and we're talking about, in the first place, a very small number of people in the first place. 3% of all employees are on 0 hours contracts. On average, they have 25 hours of work, as Matthew Taylor pointed out. And as I said, 2/3 of those, almost 70%, want the flexibility. 20% of them are students who obviously can't work full time, and many of them are retired people. And for many industries, they're a sensible way to increase employment. I mean, I have in my constituency a printing shop, and they were talking to me in one of my village halls, and they're explaining if they get a big print job that comes in, which is very unpredictable, they want to be able to pull in a couple of extra workers to get it printed over the weekend or whenever it might be. That's extra work for people who actually want that flexibility, and we should not damage that. And Matthew Taylor himself said, yes, we should reform 0 hours, request people, you know, they can have a right to request more hours as McDonald's have done, but we should not get rid of that flexibility.
One suggestion is that people should be paid more for flexibility. How would that work in, for example, the hospitality industry in, say, North Yorkshire or the Lake District?
Yeah, and that's one of the recommendations that he's put forward, which I think is one that's worth considering. Maybe there are 2 tiers of payment, and for those extra hours beyond what you're normally working, there should be a special rate. That seems something that's sensible and worth considering. But I think the key thing he said was this flexible system we have works for the vast majority of people. We should not damage that golden goose, because the employment figures in this country are very, very strong.
Rachael Maskell, how do we balance flexibility with security?
Well, the problem we've got is the insecurity that is now built in. You might talk about more employment, but it's the type of employment. The average wage of a job created since 2010, just £11,000. You know, we know that people are now really in poverty, in work, and that is going up. So the insecurity is still there as a result of this work. And what's really important is people have employment rights, and that isn't what's guaranteed under the Taylor report. And he talks about dependent contractors. We should have full employment status for all of these workers to give them the ability to have some control over their lives, because it impacts on whether or not you're able to secure housing, it impacts on whether or not you're able to feed your family. We know the levels of in-work poverty now are so high that this is really blighting the lives of so many people in my constituency, and I see them week by week in my constituency surgeries. So we've got to be very real about the control that workers have over their employment, but also we know that insecure work is undercutting substantive work as well. And we see that across, for instance, the taxi service in York, where we have Uber now coming in as opposed to, you know, local taxi services and so on. So we've got to really talk about having high standards and quality work, employment rights coming behind that.
I think on this point about pay, I mean, Matthew Taylor was there in the executive summary. He made the point that out of the G7, all the, you know, prosperous countries in the world, if you include our tax and benefit system, we have the highest average take-home pay
to my constituency, and you will know that
G7.
low pay is a very big
Rachel, you just
issue.
If I could just have my turn,
it's a very big issue in my constituency. Low pay in the constituency, which is average wages around £22,000, when the cost of living for everybody, the cost of food, the cost of fuel, is going up with inflation. And of course, if I may remain on the issue of pay, we've seen the government voting, you know, to maintain the public sector pay cap, which is keeping public sector workers down, keeping them in poverty.
That's another subject together. One final point then on that.
If I do have the opportunity to respond to that. So the average salary in this country, as Matthew Taylor mentioned, is £28,000. But I understand there may be particular issues in Rachel's constituency. You obviously have a lot of students, as I said, lots of them benefit from 0 hours contracts because they like the flexibility. And on this dependent contractors point, taxi drivers are an example. You know, you don't like Uber. If you ban that ability to be self-employed and flexible, then those people all have to become employees. They don't get to choose when they would like to work.
Of course they do, under flexibility of a contract.
If they're employees and the employer is employing them, planning it, the ability of people to say, I would like to work here, I'd like to work there, and do that when I'm ready and when it suits my
into the employment contract, and that's done in many circumstances.
But if you
we'll leave it there.
I
know we could talk about this for the rest of the programme. Thank you very much. We'll leave that subject there. Now, next week, MPs will tidy their desks here at Westminster and while there are so many rumblings about her future.
Well, I think you've seen that she's doing a very, very good job. I think she's behaved with enormous dignity since the referendum election result. She has an enormous sense of public duty. You know, we were the party that has a large number of seats and votes and have a duty to form a government, which she's done. There is an important task facing our country, that of Brexit, and she's getting on with delivering that for the British people, which I think is the right thing to do. And it's right that dominates parliamentary discussion. I think people are united behind her, in our party at least. She had a parliamentary meeting yesterday. There's enormous support for her to carry on and get this job done, in fact.
Rachael Maskell, the spotlight is on the Conservatives at the moment. Is that masking to some extent the fact that there are still schisms within the Labour Party?
Well, the Labour Party is actually united. We saw that fantastic manifesto during the general election, which really spoke of Labour values through the ages, which are very true to the Labour values today. And certainly it set alight people's hope once again in the political system that actually you can change things to better your own life. And that's really what Labour is about as we move forward, a really positive agenda that we have set out for transforming our country, addressing the real crises that we're facing, for instance, in the National Health Service and the Education Service, and right across the public sector.
Rachel, you said you're united. The biggest issue facing our country at the moment is Brexit. You know, almost 70 or 50 of your MPs just voted against your position on the single market and the customs union. Across the North East and the North, people voted overwhelmingly to leave the EU. It's unclear, maybe you could help explain it for us today, is the Labour Party policy to leave the single market or not?
Well, the Labour Party policy is very clear that we want to remain close to Europe in these
we
negotiations.
All want to remain close to Europe, but do you want to leave the single market?
I'm answering your question. Remain close to Europe through these negotiations to make sure that nothing is ruled out, to make sure that we get the best deal for our country. And certainly what we're seeing on the front bench of the Conservative Party is the different department leads contradicting each other, as we heard Emily Thornberry present at Prime Minister's Question Time yesterday, putting our country in a very insecure position before the European Union, which obviously is on the other side of the negotiation table.
Today, of course, we've seen the publication of the repeal bill. This will eventually transpose EU legislation into British law. Now, that's likely to expose more divisions within both parties, isn't it? How concerned are you about the effect on Labour Party?
Well, obviously, in the White Paper, we saw what we call the Henry the 8th clause, the fact that the government put it into that paper, the fact that they will review legislation, they put that into the repeal bill without parliamentary scrutiny. And it's absolutely vital that Parliament can examine every single part of that repeal bill to make sure that we're not seeing a watering down of regulation, which is so important to uphold standards, workers' rights, environmental protections, consumer rights as we move forward. So we will be scrutinising clause by clause that repeal bill.
And Rishi Sunak, the repeal bill is bound to pile the agony on for Theresa May, isn't it?
No, I don't think it will actually, because all it does is repeal one piece of legislation which says that Europe is sovereign to the UK, which is obviously putting effect to the referendum result, and I think most people would welcome. And the second thing it does is bring all of the existing set of EU regulations on workers' rights, environmental protection, all the other things onto the British statute book, so that the day after we leave the EU, nothing will change with regard to those. People will have complete certainty and continuity of laws, regulations and rights. So I think it's an eminently sensible piece of legislation that people should have enormous comfort by, and we will be very united on it. The issue still is, in the Labour Party, there's a message that they're putting out to students and young people across the South saying we will keep you in the single market, we believe in the free movement of people, and then across the North East, where people voted to leave, I'm hearing a very different message from Labour.
You're making that up on the spot there. And, well,
what can you answer the question
well,
for us? Is the position to leave the single market?
Then.
Yes or no?
Well, I'm absolutely. I mean, this is nonsense we're hearing from the Conservative Party, because in Labour we're absolutely clear about our negotiation position. We set it out in the manifesto, clear for everyone to read.
If it's so
and
clear,
that position
why can't we hear
is
now?
Well, we're
Should
united.
We leave the single market?
We're united.
Rachael respond.
Look, you're preempting negotiations. What we're saying is we want to work through those negotiations close to building bridges with the European Union as we do that, not throwing insults as a Conservative Party have, which is absolutely so damaging to our negotiating position, and therefore it's so vital that we work through these negotiations in a mature way to get the best deal possible for Britain.
Fundamentally, you have to choose between being a member of the single market, accepting free movement of people, and leaving.
Final question.
We have a clear position on that, and I
Rishi
still haven't
Sunak.
heard what the position is.
What would you rather, Theresa May continue as leader, or a leadership election in the near future?
Continue. Actually, she is the right person to steer us through these negotiations. She is very good at the day job of governing this country. She will be a tough negotiator, putting British interests first.
Thank you
and
very much
people are
indeed.
united behind her.
We'll leave it there.